Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this may be the first adjournment proceedings of the 44th Parliament, and the Speaker nods in assent. So I am honored to stand here before you to pursue an answer to a question that I posed in question period on November 25th. That was the day that the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development delivered a report that one could describe as scathing in relation to the government's record in reducing greenhouse gases and to one particular program. So I refer in particular to anyone who wants to look this up to Report 5 of the Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development report and to Report 4. Report 5 dealt with a historical overview of what the Government of Canada has done and not done to deliver greenhouse gas reductions. Very clearly, it's a record of 30 years of failure. I have to say I'm grief-stricken by that failure. I've had a front row seat to that failure. I was working in the Environment Minister's office when the lines were written that are repeated in Report 5 of the conclusion of the first major scientific conference internationally on the climate crisis that occurred in June 1988 in Toronto, where the scientists assembled said this, and it's quoted in Report 5 that was released this week, or last week. Humanity is conducting an unintended, uncontrolled, globally pervasive experiment whose ultimate consequences could be second only to global nuclear war. That was the conclusion of scientists in 1988, and we had a chance to do something about it globally as a species, as economies. And not only did we fail, we went in the other direction. From the commitment we made in 1992 globally, and Canada particularly, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to the coming climate crisis, both things were commitment in 1992. We have done neither. And greenhouse gas emissions, particularly in Canada, the worst record of the G7, are 21% higher at the last recorded report than they were in 1990. I've had a front row seat to a commitment from government after government to treat our children to an unlivable world. And we have precious little time to arrest that. And that's why I asked the minister in the question November 25th, COP26 left us with a tiny little chance to hold to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which we must do. And yet this report outlines that one particular program, a recent program, only partially underway, the so-called onshore emissions reductions fund, was in fact, after $70 million being spent, the Environmental Commissioner within the Office of the Auditor General was unable to, and the Natural Resources Canada that administered the program was unable to point to a single ton of greenhouse gases reduced because of the money the people of Canada were spending. This report, and I'll just quote this one paragraph, overall, Natural Resources Canada did not design the onshore program of the Emissions Reduction Fund to ensure credible and sustainable reductions of greenhouse gas emissions in the oil and gas sector or value for money spent. The minister in response said, well, don't worry, really, that program was to help the oil and gas sector during the pandemic and an economic problem. The oil and gas sector got the same salary reimbursements as other sectors. Did they need to double dip? And if they did, shouldn't we be able to see some emissions reductions?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I wish to thank my esteemed colleague for her question, certainly, but also for her decades-long activism on this file. I'm natural last night. I'm replacing him. I'm making this this address from my service vehicle in transit to Ottawa, which is a 100% electric vehicle, not to make a statement about my street creds on environmental issues, Mr. Speaker, but simply to point that out. And my government wished to thank the Commissioner to the Environment and Sustainable Development for his work and his report. As my colleague from Saanich Island knows very well. We've made tremendous progress when it comes to climate change. Let's go back to our earlier years of activism in COP1 in 1995, where very few people were paying attention to this. We only had one IPCC report that started to point to the fact that humans were causing global warming. And the only thing that countries could agree upon in Berlin in 1995 was that the commitments that we had made in Rio in 1992 were inadequate. Alors, Monsieur le Président, la seule chose, il y a 25 ans à Berlin.
The only thing countries were able to agree on is that the Rio commitments to stabilize emissions between then and 2000 were inadequate. There were no goals for reduction. There were no mechanisms set up internationally in order to fight climate change. There were no funding mechanisms either to help developing nations, to offer help from industrialized nations, to help them adapt to climate change. I am the new Environment and Climate Change Minister and introduced myself as such in Glasgow a few weeks ago. Over 50,000 people participate in these conferences now, not only government negotiators, NGO representatives, and scientists.
In these meetings, representative from civil society, from indigenous organization, from labor, from municipalities, from businesses, from innovators, from the financial sector, and investors, all saying we want to be part of this and we want to be part of the solution, which is something we've never seen before, Mr. Speaker. And to say that nothing has happened when looking at all the initiatives that have taken place at our municipal level, in our communities, in many provinces over the years, and frankly, all around the world, is to deny the fact that the world has started to tackle climate change. Now, clearly, as the Commissioner's report points out, we need to do more. And there's an agreement, there's an international agreement on the fact that we need to do more, which was recognized in Glasgow, which is recognized in many of the IPCC reports, and which is certainly recognized in the Commissioner's report. As I'm sure my colleague has read the Commissioner's report, she will know that the report of the Commissioner did not study the 2016 climate change pan-Canadian framework and plan on climate change that our government presented in 2016. Neither did his report look at the enhanced climate plan that was presented in 2020. The Commissioner did not study the 100 or so measures that have been introduced by our government since 2016, as well as the $100 billion that we are currently investing in Canada. And I'll conclude on this, Mr. Speaker. As our last inventories have shown, we've managed to flatten the curve to 2030. We've taken out more than 30 million tons of CO2 emission, CO2 equivalent emission that would be in the atmosphere. That's almost equivalent to half of Quebec's overall emissions. So our plan is working, but we need to accelerate it.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if I can have additional time to be the equivalent of the ministers. What I would say is, number one, we measure success not by good programs on paper, but by emissions reductions in real life. The atmosphere is not interested in negotiating with humanity, nor are they interested in the Liberal Party doing better than the Conservative Party. All that matters is that we live within our carbon budgets, and we are not. If we don't hold to 1.5 degrees Celsius, as the developing world and low-lying island states say, it's a death sentence for them. And after the summer we've had in British Columbia, with nearly 600 of my fellow citizens dying in the heat dome, with the wildfires, and now with the flooding, how many more death sentences do we take if we accept that 1.5 degrees Celsius is the best we can get, and we're failing to get there? We are failing to meet our commitments, and the Honourable Minister knows it. It is not a prop that he has a bicycle on his wall. It is not a prop that he's in an electric car. But it's a prop to claim that we're doing what needs to be done when we're building pipelines and subsidizing fossil fuels.
L'honorable député or l'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. and I agree with my colleague. She's right. The objective of what we're doing is to reduce greenhouse gases, and she knows very well that we know, that we've started to do this, and we have to speed up the process. This is the message that Canadians gave us.
More when it comes to climate change, and we want you to do it faster, which is why we've committed to present additional measures in the fight against climate change in Canada, Mr. Speaker, and we will not stop until we have achieved. And I am of the opinion that the last inventories that we've seen the last time emissions will grow in Canada. From now on, we will see emissions continue to go down in this country as long as our government and subsequent government continue to do what needs to be done to ensure that we achieve the targets.